Welcome to episode 11 of the A Storm of Swords reread, and in today's video we're going to be doing Davos to A Storm of Swords. And this is the first character that's actually going to have a second point of view, which I found to be very interesting. Why Davos? Even think about A Clash of Kings, he only had 3 chapters in the entire book. So George is giving us a lot more time to focus on Davos, and I guess Stannis' plotline to some extent, even though we haven't even seen Stannis yet in this book, in the aftermath of A Clash of Kings. Now, this chapter will build off the last one, where Davos has now been rescued, and he's going to Dragonstone, and he has to figure out what does he actually want to do there. Does he want to kill Melisandre? Does he want to go visit his wife? Well, what's going to happen? Is he going to become a smuggler for Salladhor Saan? Because we're going to get a fuller picture of actually what's going on with Stannis' camp to set out this book in this chapter. I will say this is another long chapter from George R.R. Martin, so thank you for that. It'll be another long recording, so strap in and prepare for a long video. As we enter page 109, Davos comes up on deck and sees Driftmark disappearing behind the ship while Dragonstone rises ahead. Smoke drifting from Dragonmont catches his attention. The sight of Dragonmont's smoke makes Davos think of Melisandre. Throughout the voyage, many things have reminded him of her, including beacon fires along the coast and the red colors of dawn and sunset, which resemble her ruby and her red garments. Davos believes Melisandre will be waiting on Dragonstone alongside Stannis as he thinks of her beauty, her power, her god, and the shadows she commands. So right off the bat, I really want to establish that George is in a lot of ways doing a parallel chapter. With Crescent in the first chapter of A Clash of Kings, it's a lot about introducing Stannis and where he's at, and the slow corruption that Melisandre is having on him as Melisandre is gaining more and more influence and power. Davos' chapter almost serves as like a reflection of that, where it feels like that manipulation and influence is complete. Stannis is not even seeing anyone else besides Melisandre. We'll talk about that a lot throughout this chapter, but it's a nice like storyline that kind of feels like it kind of concluded here. Now, we know that Stannis is not directly under Melisandre's power or anything like that, but in this situation, Stannis is at his most desperate. Think about all the actions he did in the last book. He actively played a part in killing his brother, and what was it all for? He lost the Battle of the Blackwater. He's lost everything for the most part. It's a point where Stannis is at his weakest, and Melisandre, in a lot of ways, is at her strongest. Davos reflects on how loyal she once appeared to Stannis, but now believes she has gained too much influence over him. Davos compares Stannis to a horse that has been broken and ridden by Melisandre. He believes she seeks power through the king, and blames her for leading them down the path that resulted in the death of his sons. His hatred has grown so intense that he vows to kill Melisandre and cut the living heart from her chest. This is all great because it comes from a very biased point of view. Davos is pointing the failures and the death of his sons at Melisandre, when in reality, Melisandre, from what we know, didn't really have any effect on Davos' sons dying, or even the loss of the battle, because in reality, if Stannis hadn't killed Renly, there really was no way for him to claim the Iron Throne. He needed Renly's troops. He wasn't going to bend the knee. But in a way that also had a counter effect, because once the Tyrells side with the Lannisters, and that allows them then to beat Stannis at the Battle of the Blackwater alongside of what Tyrion did, it creates this very interesting situation because, yes, Melisandre has done some very morally questionable things, but in a lot of ways, the hatred that Davos is feeling towards her is not exactly, I would say, justified, in my opinion. Now, I will say, Davos has every right to not like Mel. Same idea as Crescent. There's every right to feel that way, given the actions Melisandre has done in the past. But I do want to defend Melisandre to a degree of, like, the newfound hatred to me, like I talked about in Davos 1, is a bit misguided. But as Davos thinks this, he touches the hilt of the fine Lyzine dirk that the captain gifted him. Davos reflects on the kindness shown to him by the ship's captain, Corain Savmontes. Don't think I said that right. A Lyzini trader in Salladhor Saan's service. Corain has pale blue Lyzini eyes and a weathered face, but has spent many years trading in the Seven Kingdoms. When the captain learned that the man rescued from the sea was the famous Onion Knight, he treated Davos with great respect. Crane gave Davos the use of his own cabin, provided him with fresh clothes, and supplied him with a pair of boots that almost fit. It does go to show what kind of reputation Davos has, especially among maybe smugglers or pirates, especially Salladhor Saan's people. And I'll say this as well. This captain obviously knows that Davos is friends with Salladhor Saan, so by him rescuing Davos, he will get some sort of reward. So it does go a little bit deeper, but yes, just kind of showing that Davos does have some influence and some friends in pretty high places. As we get into page 110, Davos is grateful for Captain Carane's generosity, but his body is still weak from his ordeal. The rich lysine foods such as snails and lampreys make him violently ill, and after his first meal with the captain, he spends the rest of the day sick over the ship's rail. Think about any case that you've ever heard of people that were stranded at sea, or when you've been really starved to the point where you're barely eating anything. Something that pops into my mind is the Holocaust and how much unfortunate death happened because once these camps were freed, a lot of these people were being given very rich food, things that their body couldn't handle because they'd been so starved for so many years. That's kind of something that Davos is going through, that Davos has to pace himself a bit with the things he's consuming because he's had little to no sustenance for a good amount of time now. As Dragonstone draws nearer, Davos can make out the shape of Dragonmont and the black stone castle built into its slopes, with its dragon-shaped towers and gargoyles. He leans heavily on the rail because he has not fully recovered as his legs shake when he stands too long, and he still suffers coughing fits that bring up bloody phlegm. Davos reassures himself that the gods would not have saved him from wildfire in the sea, only to let him die from sickness afterward. That would be a very sick joke. Davos survives all of this just to die right afterwards to illness or sickness. You want to go back to the example I just talked about with the Holocaust. Unfortunately, that's what happened to so many people. They got freed and then died from, well, something else, dysentery, for instance. The world is a brutal and horrible place. And one thing I do want to go back to is just the description of Dragonstone. I've always loved that description. I've always loved the way Dragonstone is kind of described by George. I think it's one of the more fantasy castles that I can picture in my mind. I think the shows have done a fairly good job of it at times. I would love to see more of Dragonstone. It still haven't gotten the vibe of it that I feel like is in the book with House of the Dragon or Game of Thrones, but yeah, still one of the most badass looking castles in the series. The sounds of the ship, the oarmaster's drum, the sail, and the creaking oars remind him of his younger days as a smuggler. During the reign of Aerys II, those sounds often signaled the approach of Sir Tristram's sea watch, whose duty was to hunt smugglers, as Davos remembers how much he feared them in those years. He reflects on how different his life was then. Before the onion run to Storm's End, before Stannis knighted him and shortened his fingers, before he became Lord Davos Seaworth, it's just a very different time. Davos has gained a lot more influence and station over those years. He used to be doing things that were very illegal, very risky, and dangerous to try and make a living, and now he is a lord. He is knighted. He has a family, and he's been serving Stannis for all of these now years. But it does remind him of a different life, a different path. Would the deaths of his children have happened if he had chosen that other life? Would he still be alive? These are all questions that would be going through my mind as well. Davos then recalls what Captain Corraine told him about the Battle of the Blackwater. According to the captain, the Lannister Tyrell forces struck Stannis from the flank, while many of his bannermen abandoned him during the battle. Corraine also repeats the story that Renly Baratheon's ghost was seen leading the attack, wearing glowing green armor illuminated by wildfire and crowned with burning antlers. Hearing this makes Davos wonder whether his own dead sons might exist as shades as well. Having witnessed many strange things in his life, he does not dismiss the possibility. Think about this from Davos' point of view. He has already seen this shadow baby creature that went on to kill Sir Courtney Penrose. He knows that played a factor in Renly's death. Now you're hearing that Renly has come back from the dead and helped defeat Stannis. It's not out of the realm of possibility. And all of this in Davos' mind, it's hard to understand. It's hard to comprehend. And you do obviously point to Melisandre. All of the bad things that have happened in Davos' life, he is pointing towards her. And whether that's fair or not, Mel has played a role in that. But also this does serve to just kind of, again, catch up the audience, but also specifically Davos as to what happened after the battle. Davos asks whether any of Stannis' supporters remained loyal after the defeat. Crane tells him that some did, particularly the Queen's relatives, the Florents. He explains that many survivors were evacuated by Salladhor Saan's fleet, and that Lord Florent now serves as Stannis' hand on Dragonstone. As the ship enters Dragonstone's harbor, Davos notices how empty it is compared to before the Blackwater campaign. He remembers a harbor once crowded with ships and activity, but now only a few vessels remain. Davos spots Salladhor Saan's flagship Valyrian, along with several other Lysine ships nearby. He searches the harbor for signs of his son's ships, Lady Maria and Wraith, but sees nothing. It is a very depressing chapter for Davos, where it's kind of confirmation that his sons are dead. Those ships are gone. All of Stannis' power is scattered and gone. And even at the beginning of A Clash of Kings, Stannis didn't have that much power to begin with. But he had more than this. It at least looked like there were people living on Dragonstone. And now it's a ghost town. And think about it from this point of view. Think about all of the mothers and sisters and all that stuff that have lost family members. What this war has taken from the people of Dragonstone, the neighboring areas that supported Stannis, as of right now, it shows the depressing vibe of Dragonstone, of what has occurred to Stannis' cause, and how it feels like Stannis' cause is doomed and over. It's one of the better storylines, I think, of this book, where again you see Stannis' rise and influence and in power. But for Davos, it shows everything that he believes is justified, that all of it comes back to Melisandre. As we get to page 111. As Shayla's dance enters Dragonstone's harbor, the crew lowers the sail and relies on oars alone to bring the ship into port. Captain Carraine tells Davos that Salladhor Saan will want to see him immediately, but Davos insists that he must go to King Stannis first. His determination is driven by his desire to find Melisandre. Carraine refuses, explaining that no one is permitted to see the king directly and that Salladhor Saan must be consulted first. Too weak to argue, Davos reluctantly agrees. Now, it's very interesting to think about what if this actually didn't happen? What if Davos did go straight to Stannis and Mel? What would have happened? Because based on, I would say, chapters that happen in the future and how we know Melisandre's magic seems to work, she's alerted to dangers before they happen. Well, Davos at this point hasn't vocalized or publicly said anything about killing Melisandre. That's all been internalized. But now when he goes to Salladhor Saan and he starts to talk about what he actually wants to do, that's probably the point in which Melisandre, the danger radar, starts going off. And so that's a really important idea. Like, that's a really interesting what if. What if he had been allowed to go straight there? But obviously, this captain, for one, wants his reward. He wants Salladhor Saan to know he's the one that saved the Onion Knight. And also, if you let Davos go straight to Dragonstone, he might get himself killed. So, for the captain, a good idea to send him to Salladhor Saan first, so that Davos is more updated on the situation. They discover that Salladhor Saan is not aboard his flagship Valyrian, but instead inspecting cargo in the hold of a Pentoshi merchant ship called Bountiful Harvest. Saan is busy counting jars of spice and checking cargo manifests with the assistance of 2 eunuchs. He complains that several jars listed on the inventory appear to be missing and accuses the Pentoshi merchants of trying to cheat him. When he notices Davos, Saan is shocked. Since everyone had believed Davos died at the Blackwater, he jokingly asks whether he is seeing a ghost. Again, a lot of references to ghosts and of death and magic. It fits this chapter really well. Davos assures him that he is alive. Saan remarks on how thin and pale Davos has become compared to the man he once knew. Overjoyed, Salladhor Saan embraces Davos warmly and kisses him on both cheeks and on the forehead. I really want to point out something that George tries to do with Davos is almost suggesting that, like, this is Davos's second life. Where later on in this chapter, we run into Patchface, and there's a lot of parallels in terms of, both of them were involved in some situation that easily should have had both of them be killed. In Patchface's case, there was a really big storm that caused a bunch of shipwrecks, and somehow he washed up, but was never the same. Davos, in the same way, is, well, he was in the middle of a battle. By all rights, he should have probably died. And now he's become a new man. He has a new purpose and focus and goal in his life. It's very interesting that George very delicately kind of describes that throughout this chapter. Feeling Davos's heartbeat and warmth, Saan marvels that the sea returned him alive after everyone assumed he had perished. Again, there's a lot of nods to a possibility or theories that maybe the drowned god saved Davos or has some sort of plan for him, similar to the theories of Patchface being this drowned god prophet. There's a lot of little winks to that here, so I think that was also interesting to bring up here. And even as I was saying that, Davos briefly thinks of Patchface, who is also lost at sea and returned changed. He wonders whether his own ordeal has changed him as well. There's a lot of nods to that idea, and I do think that obviously Davos has been changed by this experience. But even in this chapter, as we go back to Davos 1, Davos believed that he heard the Mother, or the new gods, talking to him. And I think that's fascinating because we don't know if this is actually the case. It just could be Davos and inside of his own mind. But it could be the idea that there's confirmation bias here, that Davos believes that there had to have been some sort of divine intervention, maybe similar to like Patchface. But Davos explains how he survived by swimming beneath the chain during the Battle of the Blackwater, eventually washing ashore on one of the spears of the Merling King. Davos tells Saan that he would have died there if Shayla's dance had not found and rescued him. Pleased with the captain's actions, Salladhor Saan praises Karain and promises him a reward for saving Davos. Saan then orders one of the eunuchs to take Davos to the owner's cabin, as we get into page 112. Salladhor Saan orders his eunuchs to care for Davos, instructing him to bring hot wine mixed with cloves and lime, along with white cheese and green olives, and he also expresses concern about Davos's cough. Everybody needs a friend like Salladhor Saan. You know, Davos is basically on death's door, and Salladhor Saan is just going into, I'm a mother, I'm going to take care of you, it's all going to be okay. And I want to say, there's a lot of things you can say about Salladhor Saan, but in this chapter specifically, everybody needs a friend that's willing to disagree with you and tell you the truth of the situation. One thing I really appreciate about this chapter is you just don't see a lot of friends that do that in this world. Davos is escorted to a luxurious cabin in the stern of the ship. The room is richly furnished with thick carpets, stained glass windows, and oversized leather chairs. Food and drink are brought to him, including the hot spiced wine, and Davos drinks it gratefully and feels the warmth ease the discomfort in his chest. Salladhor Saan joins him shortly afterward and jokes about the wine, remarking that the Pentoshi seem to prefer wine to water. Davos replies that hot wine helps his chest and recalls his mother saying it works better than a compress. Now, I will say this. Obviously, there's better ways to medicate yourself, but in times like this, medieval times where Westeros is kind of inspired by, yeah, this would be kind of your healthcare. And if it works, I guess. Salladhor jokes about Davos's long stay on the rock and then points out that the enormous chairs were actually built for Illyrio, and these were specifically designed for his weight and his size. So Illyrio's a big guy. I will also say this, Salladhor Saan, why are we robbing Illyrio? Okay, Illyrio didn't do anything wrong. He's just a little Blackfire supporter, okay? Leave the guy alone, okay? Let's rob some Lannister ships, fine, by all means. But Illyrio, just a step too far. It's, I guess, a nice connection as well to Daenerys' first chapter, but Salladhor describes Illyrio as enormously fat and jokes that a fat man always travels with his own cushion, which is a funny joke as well. Davos asks how Salladhor comes to possess a Pentoshi ship and wonders if he has returned to piracy. Salladhor indignantly denies being a pirate as he claims that he is merely collecting what he is owed after not receiving proper payment for his service to Stannis. Instead of gold, he explains, he accepted a royal charter from Lord Alistair Florence, Stannis' hand, naming him Lord of Blackwater Bay, which is hilarious. This is a very empty title. It means absolutely nothing because Stannis and the power of the Florence cannot back this up, but it's just, in a way, giving Salladhor Saan legitimacy to do this. This is what he would have been wanting to do the whole time, and it's a way of appeasing him, keeping him on Stannis' side, all that type of stuff. And this is not foreign, by the way. The Velaryons used to do this all of the time when they were the master of the ships, really before the time of, like, the dance. This is a lot of ways how they would become very rich. they would tax like everything coming into the harbors of King's Landing or that general area. And you could say, oh, well, it's kind of a little bit pirating, but they had legal precedent to do it. So it's kind of the same general idea. He humorously compares these ships to smugglers and insists that his seizures are entirely lawful. Well, they're lawful to Stannis' cause, I guess, but they are absolutely not lawful in Westeros. Salladhor notes that unlike Stannis, he does not punish offenders by taking fingers. Instead, he confiscates ships, cargoes, and occasionally collects ransoms. Turning serious, he remarks on Davos' poor condition as he notes how thin he has become and worries about his persistent cough. And I just want to point this out for Salladhor Saan. Great friend, right? We make some jokes about, oh, I'm basically a pirate, but I'm not actually a pirate, and then genuine concern about Davos, like any good friend should be. Salladhor also notes that Davos is no longer wearing the pouch containing the bones of his shortened fingers. By instinct, Davos reaches for the pouch before remembering that it is gone. He tells Salladhor that he has lost his finger bones in the river during the Blackwater. Another sign to just point to, Davos is becoming a different man. This is his second chance, more or less, at life. Or I guess if you want to say his third chance, because his knighting or his finger bones being taken by Stannis was like technically his second life now, his second chance. I guess this is now his third. But there's also the idea that maybe Melisandre took those finger bones. There are theories. I can't explain it in the video. It would take too long. But there are ideas there. As we get into page 113, Salladhor recalls witnessing the devastation of the Battle of the Blackwater. He was further out on the bay, he was past the chain like we talked about in Book 2, and says even seeing it from a distance was horrifying. Davos asks whether any of Stannis' ships escaped the wildfire, and Salladhor explains that several ships farther upriver, including Lord Steffan, Ragged Jenna, Swift Sword, and Laughing Lord, avoided the flames because they were beyond the Pyromancer's wildfire. However, once the chain was raised across the river, those ships were trapped. Some surrendered, while many crews deliberately sank their own vessels to prevent them from falling into Lannister hands. Now, those are some loyal men. Let's not surrender. Let's sink our ship so the other side doesn't get it. Those are some loyal men. But like we talked about all in Book 2, it was a perfect trap. Because once they get past that chain, there is no escape. Salladhor has heard rumors that Ragged Jenna and Laughing Lord continue operating as pirates on the river, though he cannot confirm whether the stories are true. Davos then asks about his sons, Dale and Allard, and Salladhor sadly confirms that neither survived. Salladhor offers one piece of good news, though, that his son Devon was rescued during the retreat and reportedly never left Stannis' side throughout the battle. So I guess there is one thing there that Davos can be happy about. One of his sons is alive, but it doesn't help with the fact that he still lost, a couple sons and the devastation that would come with that, especially now that Stannis has also lost, it would appear, the war at this point. Davos is overwhelmed with relief upon learning Devon is alive and immediately wants to see him. Salladhor suggests that Davos will also want to return to Cape Wrath to see his wife and younger children and offers to provide him a ship. But Davos insists that King Stannis will provide him a ship, but Salladhor points out that Stannis no longer has a fleet because his ships were destroyed at the Blackwater. It's just confirmation here is Stannis has no power. And even if we go back to Book 2, Stannis already had limited power then. Yes, he had a pretty sizable fleet, but he didn't have nearly large enough of an army to take on any of the other major powers in Westeros. And now that his fleet has been destroyed, what does Stannis have left? He has a little bit of men, but not nearly enough to do anything outside of maybe defend Dragonstone. His fleet is largely now Salladhor Saan's fleet. That's all he has left. Stannis has been broken by the Blackwater. Salladhor then once again tries to offer Davos one of his ships and proposes that they return to profitable smuggling together, sailing secretly into ports such as Braavos, Myr, and Volantis, and leaving with valuable cargo. But Davos declines, stating that his duty remains with King Stannis. He argues that despite the defeat, Stannis is still the lawful heir to the Iron Throne. And Davos is even being given a way out to avoid this war. Stannis' cause is obviously failing. Davos could theoretically maybe return to his old life, try to make a living once again, escape the war that's cost him so much. But for Davos, it's too late. Davos is not that kind of man. Davos does have his own type of honor and what he believes in. And what he believes in is Stannis. And there's also some issues that come with that, right? If you do just abandon Stannis here, well, what's going to happen to Devon? What's going to happen to the rest of your family? You're kind of in a tough spot. And for Davos, it's kind of like, why return to this life? It would make your life feel like you really went nowhere if you're going back to smuggling. But Salladhor then responds that legal rights mean little without ships and resources. He warns Davos that Stannis has changed since the battle. According to Salladhor, Stannis now isolates himself in the Stone Drum, rarely seeing anyone and spending his time brooding. In Stannis' absence, Queen Selyse and her uncle, Lord Alliser Florent, effectively govern Dragonstone. Alliser acts as Hand of the King and uses Stannis' seal on official documents. Salladhor notes that Dragonstone is now a tiny, impoverished kingdom with few knights, no meaningful wealth, and no fleet beyond the handful of ships Salladhor himself still commands. He complains that despite all of his service, there's no gold available to pay the debts owed to him by Stannis. And that's the other thing, is not only is Salladhor Saan all of Stannis' power at sea, he also is struggling to maintain Salladhor's services because you're not paying him. So you have to do other types of things to keep his service to them. And what all of this does so well is I really think it orchestrates how war changes the whole playing field. Now, we've talked about this from the Lannister side of things, but look at Stannis. Yes, Stannis didn't die in the battle, but what has Stannis become? He's brooding even more. We're even told in this chapter he's barely eating. He feels like he's lost a part of his soul. It all kind of goes back to Davos 2 in A Clash of Kings, where Davos saw Stannis as visibly aged. He seems thinner. Something seems wrong with Stannis. And that goes to build into this chapter, where you do have Stannis starting to become consumed by everything that's occurred in the last book. And I love that, because when you think about what we're looking at with the television shows, with like House of the Dragon or Game of Thrones, the one major criticism throughout the later seasons in House of the Dragon is the battles don't have this emotional weight to them. Like, after the battle, they usually don't have this type of world-shattering or character-breaking moments for these people where they're going to have to overcome or be consumed by the past. And I love that here, because you can see it. All the major players, Tyrion, Davos, Stannis, those were our major players in the Battle of the Blackwater. None of them died, but all of them have been completely changed, whether it be physically, mentally, or even trauma. All of them are different characters now. As we get into page 114, Davos is struck by a severe coughing fit and struggles to understand Salladhor's claims that Stannis sees no one. Salladhor explains that Stannis allows no visitors except Melisandre, and Davos immediately understands who he means. Concerned for Davos' health, Salladhor urges him to rest, recover his strength, and stop dwelling on politics. But Davos presses for more information, asking if Melisandre is truly the only person Stannis will see. Salladhor confirms that guards keep everyone away from the king, including Queen Selyse and Princess Shireen. Meals are brought to Stannis, but often go untouched. He reports rumors circulating around Dragonstone that Stannis and Melisandre spend time deep within the volcano, descending through hidden shafts and stairways into fiery chambers beneath the mountain. According to the stories, these places are so hot that only Melisandre can walk through unharmed, which unnerves Salladhor greatly. Now, this might not all be true, but it's building up the fact that Melisandre has complete control and sway over Stannis at Dragonstone. It goes to reinforce what Davos has already thought, that Melisandre has consumed Stannis, and to free Stannis, he has to kill her. It's the same argument that Cresson used, except here's the difference. Cresson saw the potential. He saw the wave coming. He understood what Melisandre posed as a threat to Stannis. Even when Davos might have had worries, it wasn't to the extent he's at now. And so you see that progression. Now it's the opposite, where Melisandre has, it seems, full control over Stannis. That may or may not be the case, given what we're going to find out later on, but as of right now, she has control over him because of his desperate situation, and now Davos realizes he has to do what Cresson tried to do. It's a really awesome, I think, building of the characters and of the progression of that story from George. Davos becomes convinced that Melisandre is responsible for Stannis' defeat, believing she unleashed the disaster at the Blackwater to punish him for relying less on her and to prove he could not succeed without her magic. Again, I think this is pretty unfair. You've got to remember that even if Stannis had taken the throne, Melisandre would have gained even more power in terms of now she's influential and has sway over the governance of the entire realm, not just, say, Dragonstone or parts of the Stormlands. That, to me, I don't think is fair to Mel, but I understand where Davos is coming from. Salladhor notes that many others have voiced similar suspicions, but warns Davos to be careful. Dragonstone is now filled with Melisandre's followers who are loyal to her and dangerous to oppose. And at this, Davos probably makes his biggest mistake that may be the reason that Melisandre is alerted to his assassination attempt. Davos reveals the knife that Captain Carraine gave him and declares that he intends to use it to kill Melisandre by cutting out her heart. He reflects that he is not even certain that she can be killed by ordinary means, remembering how Maester Crescent died from poisoned wine while Melisandre survived unharmed. Nevertheless, Davos believes a knife through the heart might succeed, recalling old tales that even demons can be slain by cold iron. But think about what that even says about Melisandre. If Davos, at this point, is having doubts about being able to kill Melisandre with a weapon, think about what that does for maybe the average person. The stories of Melisandre and who she is, the fear that is built around her as a person, and even think about the way that she finds that information through visions and stuff. It feels a lot like Bloodraven. Does it not? Like the way that you get that vibe, say, in the Duncan Egg novellas or even the history that George has given us, it's kind of the same vibe, given the way the governing in Dragonstone feels like it's being done. Alarmed at this, Salladhor warns him that such talk is dangerous and suggests Davos is still weak, feverish, and not thinking clearly after his ordeal at sea. Salladhor urges him once again to rest and regain his strength rather than pursue thoughts of assassinating Melisandre. And Salladhor is trying to be a good friend. He knows what Davos is proposing is suicide. And he's going to say this as we get into the chapter, so I'll wait till then, but it's got to sound crazy. Davos magically appears, he's alive, and the first thing he's wanting to do sounds like a suicide mission. We all need a friend like this that blatantly calls out how crazy our plans are. As we get into page 115, Davos refuses Salladhor's advice to rest, believing that delay would only weaken his determination to act against Melisandre. Though visibly sick, coughing, trembling, and weakened from his ordeal, Davos insists on leaving for Dragonstone Castle immediately. He tells Salladhor that he's going to see his son Devon and return to the castle, fully aware that Melisandre is there as well. Salladhor worries that Davos intends to assassinate the Red Priestess and points out that Davos is in no condition to carry out such a dangerous task. That's another part of this. It'd be a different conversation if maybe Davos was in full health. But think about how weak he is. What's to even say he could overpower Melisandre in a physical fight? And that's another part of this, just like Davos' whole plan just sounds like a crazy man who's come back from the dead to try and kill Mel. Salladhor reminds Davos that while Stannis' fleet was burning on the Blackwater, Queen Selyse and Melisandre were burning supposed traitors on Dragonstone. Davos correctly guesses that Lord Sunglass and Hubert Rampton's sons were among those executed by fire. Salladhor warns that whether Davos succeeds or fails in killing Melisandre, he will almost certainly be burned to death in retaliation. And this, to me, is the horrible part of this. There is no happy ending for Davos here, and George does such a great job of building the tension, because right away you're sitting here going, wait, yeah, that's right. If Davos doesn't succeed, they'll burn him. If he does succeed, they'll burn him, which is a terrible way to go. I think probably burning to death has got to be one of the worst things that could possibly happen to you, and that's what Davos is walking into. It kind of shows the determination, the bravery that he's come back with, and maybe this is more the sense of he has nothing to lose, even though he does have a wife and other kids that are still alive. It's shown what his experiences have kind of done to him, have molded him into. Davos responds that this is precisely why he survived. He believes the gods preserved his life for the purpose of ending Melisandre's influence and stopping the destruction that she has caused. He argues that his rescue is no accident, noting that no sensible captain would normally sail near the dangerous rocks where he was washed ashore. And this is a very interesting point of the conversation here, because Was there some sort of divine intervention? Davos, in a lot of ways, is acting kind of like a soldier for the new gods. Remember, Melisandre had those statues burned in the last book. So, in a lot of ways, there's also that ripple effect there as well. That Davos feels as though he's betrayed the gods that he's grown up with, and so he's also just trying to serve them, to strike down this servant of darkness. Salladhor attributes the rescue to bad winds, but Davos believes divine intervention was responsible. Davos claims that the mother spoke to him while he was stranded, accusing him and Stannis' followers of calling forth both fire and shadows. He recalls secretly rowing Melisandre beneath Storm's End and witnessing the birth of the shadow creature that later carried out assassinations. Davos blames Melisandre for the deaths of Maester Cresson, Renly Baratheon, Courtney Penrose, and ultimately his own sons. Now, in 3 of those, he's right. His sons, not so much. But you can totally get what Davos is saying. And I talked about this a lot in his first chapter. A lot of people that go through experiences like this are similar to what Davos is saying here. George writes this very realistically, that their survival, which defied all odds, had to be some sort of divine intervention. And whether you believe in this religion or whatever religion in real life, a lot of that is very common. And so that is what Davos feels. He feels that he now has a sense or a duty to take out Mel. Convinced that justice now demands her death, he declares that someone must finally kill Melisandre. Salladhor even agrees to this, but not him. Someone should. He emphasizes that Davos is physically weak, not a trained assassin, and unlikely to succeed. All of which, I agree. Salladhor Saan is being a great friend to Davos here, and telling him like it is, your plan is pretty stupid. It's not going to work. But Davos, unfortunately, is too determined. As an alternative, though, Salladhor suggests leaving Dragonstone, sailing to Braavos, and hiring a faceless man to carry out the killing instead. Now, this would be very expensive, and I don't know if Salladhor Saan would actually do this. I think a lot of what I think Salladhor is trying to get Davos to do is just cool out and get him to think about more, and so that he'll eventually chicken out. That's what I think he's doing. He's trying to manipulate Davos to an extent for a good reason, but ultimately he's not successful. He makes one last attempt to keep Davos aboard, urging him to sit, eat, recover his strength, and reconsider. But as we get into page 116, Davos is not willing to do it. He grows frustrated with Salladhor's attempts to stop him, feeling that carrying out his mission is already difficult enough without his friend's interference. He tells Salladhor that he is consumed by vengeance and has no appetite for food. He asks only for good wishes and permission to leave. And you totally understand this from Davos' point of view. He's motivated. He wants to get this done. The more time that he spends waiting, his nerves might creep up, the adrenaline might not be able to carry him to do the action he wants to do. But at this, Salladhor, in my opinion, gives one of the cooler and most underrated speeches of this entire book. Salladhor bitterly argues that if Davos dies, he will be the one forced to return Davos' remains to his wife and children and tell them they have lost a husband and a father. Though angry, Salladhor ultimately gives up trying to stop him, sarcastically promising to collect Davos' bones and return them to his surviving sons. Think about what Salladhor Saan is saying. He's straight up saying, Davos, you're going to die, and you're now leaving me with all of the responsibility and really the guilt. Think about how horrible that is. You know, this happens all the time in the military where, let's say, a soldier dies. Who now has to go bring that news to the family? Tell them the horrible news that someone that they care about is dead. I really love that idea. The themage there, the horrors of war and what it does not only to the soldier but to the family. Great little, I think, mini speech there. And I think Salladhor Saan is definitely one of the more underrated characters, especially in, I would say, book 2 and 3. Davos leaves despite the tension between them, regretting that their parting ended on such poor terms. Davos might be thinking, I might be going to my grave, and even my best friend, we've ended on pretty bad terms. The journey from the harbor to Dragonstone Castle is long and exhausting. The once busy streets are nearly deserted, with rats replacing the crowds of sailors, soldiers, merchants, and children that once filled them. It really reinforces the theme of despair, death that's come to Dragonstone, the sadness of this book really in general. Davos' weakened condition becomes increasingly apparent as his legs feel unsteady and repeated coughing fits force him to stop and rest several times. No one comes to help him or even investigate. Most homes are shuttered, barred, or marked by signs of mourning. Seeing the grief throughout Dragonstone reminds Davos that the losses of the Blackwater exceeded far beyond his own family. Thousands sailed into battle, but only hundreds returned. And that's the truth of it. That's the key. Not only do you have Melisandre, this red sorceress who has basically spread fear throughout Dragonstone, it's all of these people that have lost husbands, sons, uncles, grandfathers. It has destroyed Dragonstone and any hope or happiness that was there. And don't get me wrong, Dragonstone's never been a very happy place. If you think about it with Fire and Blood or with Stannis being the person ruling it, Dragonstone's never been the happiest place to begin with. Davos reflects sadly that his sons did not die alone and silently prays for mercy on all who perished. When Davos finally reaches Dragonstone Castle, he finds the gates closed and begins pounding on them. After repeated knocking and kicking, a crosswoman appears atop the gatehouse and demands to know who is there. Davos identifies himself as Sir Davos Seaworth and requests an audience with King Stannis. The guard dismisses him, assuming he is drunk, and tells him to leave. Remembering Salladhor's warning that access to the king is tightly controlled, Davos changes his approach and asks instead for his son, Devon, who serves as Stannis' squire. And if you're this guard, you've got to be thinking, who is this guy? Davos is obviously dead. He's been dead for a while. There's no chance that he survived or anything like that. And also, this guard's been given strict orders. Nobody's to come to the castle to see Stannis or anything like that. So, yeah, I think Davos is just another ghost that's shown up to Dragonstone. The guard asks again who he is, and Davos identifies himself as the Onion Knight. The guard insists that the Onion Knight died at the Blackwater, noting that his ship was destroyed in the battle. Davos acknowledges that his ship was burned, but insists that he survived and is standing before the gates. He then asks whether Jate is still captain of the gate, hoping to find someone who knows him personally and can still verify his identity. As we get into page 117, Davos asks after several men he once knew on Dragonstone: Jate Blackberry, Lord Chittering, Hookface Will, and Hal the Hog, hoping one of them might still be alive to recognize him. But the crossbowman reports that Lord Chittering burned on the Blackwater and that both Hookface Will and Hal the Hog are dead. He does not recognize Jate Blackberry and assumes he's likely dead as well. Think about the vibe you kind of get from Catelyn in A Clash of Kings when she comes back to Riverrun and she really doesn't know anybody. Nobody knows her from her childhood. Kind of the same vibe for Davos, but even a darker spin. You know, these people are dead. All these people that Davos might have known for years now are just gone. They're replaced with new guards, with new people, and nobody even can recognize Davos, who would probably be one of the more recognizable people there. He had a lot of comings and goings from there. And now, people don't even know him anymore. Hearing these names confirms to Davos how many familiar faces have been lost in the war. He reflects on memories of each man and thinks of them joining his sons among the dead. The guard becomes uncertain that Davos might actually be who he claims to be and eventually orders him to wait while he checks. A short time later, Davos is instructed to enter through a sally port rather than the main gate. This already should be very suspicious. Why isn't Davos just being escorted in? He is someone that is very high station and in Stannis' councils, and whatever you want to say that nobody's visiting Stannis, he would still have a fairly good place at court at Dragonstone, you would assume, but not here. And that right away should be very confusing to Davos. The guards who admit him are strangers wearing the fox and flower sigil of House Florent, highlighting how much Dragonstone's garrison has changed since the Blackwater. Again, you're looking at it from Davos' point of view as all of these people do not know him. They have no loyalty to him. There is no bond between Davos and any of these men. It's a completely foreign and trap that he's walking into. Instead of taking him to Stannis and the Stone Drum, they escort him beneath the Dragon's Tail and into Aegon's garden. Davos asks whether Stannis knows he's returned, but the sergeant dismisses the question and orders him to wait. This should be the first sign to Davos that something is wrong. They're not taking him directly to the king or even Selyse or Melisandre or Alistair Florent. They're almost just kind of treating him as though he's like this prisoner or he's someone that's not really of big station. Imagine a sergeant talking this way to Davos in book 2. It's a lot of these clear signs that George does very subtly that Davos hasn't picked up on yet, but he slowly starts to figure it out. While waiting, Davos notices the gardens, pine trees, the wild roses, thorny hedges, and cranberry bogs, wondering why he has been brought here. But then he hears bells and laughter as Patchface runs through the garden with Princess Shireen chasing after him. Spotting Davos, Patchface abruptly stops. Before we give his prophecy, that to me is very interesting. Patchface seeing Davos almost is like he recognizes someone else that has also basically escaped death, or maybe has been saved by the Drowned God or some other divine intervention. I think this is very on the nose foreshadowing to maybe things to come forward, especially with the prophecy, but even in the demeanor, the way that Patchface looks at Davos, it's very interesting. Again, there's a lot of parallels between Crescent and Davos's chapter, because the same thing happens with Crescent in the first book, where Patchface almost stops, and he goes and he looks at Crescent in a way that's similar to this. And even the prophecy that they utter are very interesting, because Patchface then says this: "Fool's blood, king's blood, blood on the maiden's thigh, but chains for the guests and chains for the bride and groom, A. Again, this is all a reference to the Red Wedding, but we also know there will be some connection between Stannis' cause and the Red Wedding as well. Stannis is going to try and use these leeches to then have all these people die. So it's a little bit of that connection, but it also paints in your mind for Davos, like, is he going to die? What is this trying to say here? All of that is really great. Before Shireen can catch him, Patchface leaps away and disappears among the trees. Davos smiles at the familiar sight of the princess and her fool, a rare moment of warmth after everything he has endured. But while distracted by a coughing fit, Davos is suddenly knocked to the ground by a young boy who crashes into him at full speed. Now, before we get into who this is, the same thing happens to Crescent. It's a little different, but Crescent gets knocked to the ground because of Patchface in book 2, and you see that, again, there's so many parallels, and I really like this chapter for how it calls back to the first chapter of Clash. It's a really, really underrated chapter. The boy then quickly gets back to his feet and complains that Davos was in his way. Davos notices the boy's jet black hair and striking blue eyes, marking him as someone of significance before the scene continues. Now, we're going to know this is Edric Storm, but these are very distinct features. They're very Baratheon features. As we get into page 118, Davos agrees that he should not have been standing in the boy's path and is immediately overcome by another coughing fit as he struggles to get back to his feet. And another thing that kind of tells us about Edric is Edric's a little bit arrogant. He's grown up being the son, or the bastard son, of Robert Baratheon, and you can kind of see that in the way he acts. It's kind of similar to Robert and Renly. The boy helps him up, and seeing how ill he appears, asks whether he should summon the maester. Davos declines, insisting that it's only a cough and that it will pass. The boy explains that he's been playing monsters and maidens with Princess Shireen and has been pretending to be the monster. When the boy asks his name, Davos introduces himself as Sir Davos Seaworth. The boy is skeptical, remarking that Davos does not look much like a knight, but Davos identifies himself as the Onion Knight, which immediately catches the boy's attention. A lot of similarities here to Sansa and how she views knights. Very interesting the way that George also paints that into Edric. Edric has not seen many people that call themselves knights that look like Davos. The boy then reveals that he knows the story of how Davos smuggled food into Storm's End during the siege that threatened Stannis and his garrison. He then proudly introduces himself as Edric Storm, the acknowledged bastard son of King Robert Baratheon. Davos instantly recognized the resemblance, noting Robert's features in the boy's face while also tracing the Florent in him. Edric eagerly asks whether Davos knew his father, but Davos explains that although he often saw Robert while visiting Stannis at court, they never actually spoke. And that's so interesting about Edric is you can kind of see him as he's idolizing Robert. He wants to be like his father, asking Davos about him. And this is all really nice setup, because what is this setting up for the rest of the book? It's setting up the idea of, will Stannis burn Edric? Will that Will that happen? And also, Davos saving Edric in this book as well. Building that connection between the two. And you see right here why Stannis would dislike Edric, because he's a constant reminder of Robert and Renly. He's a constant reminder of the slights that Stannis has felt. And all of that's so interesting. The way it feels so organic and natural. It doesn't feel like George is just putting a character in here that, oh, we need to know for later on in the story. It feels totally organic. Edric proudly recalls that Robert personally taught him how to fight and visited him regularly while he was growing up. He says on his last name day, Robert sent him a smaller version of his famous warhammer, though it was left behind at Storm's End. Having heard the story of Davos' punishment, Edric asks whether it is true that Stannis cut off his fingers. Another thing I want to point out here is, think about what Edric just said. Edric actually did get training with his father. His father was more of a father to him than, say, the Lannister kids, it would appear. Like, we never get any indication that Robert was like this with Joffrey. It is interesting to note that even Robert and his parenting style, he was never really a great father to the Lannister kids, but that probably had a lot more to do with his horrible relationship with Cersei than it necessarily did him not wanting to be necessarily a father. And don't get me wrong, he rarely ever saw Edric, but at least in the interactions that Edric seems to have, they're very positive. Now, that doesn't seem to be the case with the Lannister kids. Davos then shows him his hand and explains that Stannis removed only the last joints of 4 fingers while leaving the thumb untouched. After examining the hand carefully, Edric concludes that Stannis should not have cut off any of Davos' fingers. Davos explains the reasoning, though. Stannis rewarded him for saving Storm's End with fish and onions, but punished him for years of smuggling. Edric remains unconvinced, arguing that since Davos saved Stannis and his men from starvation, the punishment was unfair. What I love about this conversation is it instantly shows the differences that Robert and Renly had with Stannis. Stannis is somebody that's all about upholding the laws and serving justice, even when it comes at the expense of somebody that did save you, because one good act does not wash out the bad, nor vice versa. Robert and Renly were never like that. They would have rewarded Davos for this. He would have probably been even richer than he is now. He wouldn't have lost his finger bones. It just shows you that. And that's what I think is going to annoy Stannis so much, is how much Edric is like the other brothers, not Stannis. But as we get into page 119, Davos politely responds to Edric's claims about Robert, but privately reflects on how different Robert and Stannis truly were. Looking at Edric, he sees similarities not only to Robert, but also to Renly, a realization that makes him uneasy. Obviously, foreshadowing for later. We know King's blood is going to be a big thing moving forward in this story, and Edric is in a very dangerous place. Before their conversation can continue, though, footsteps approach through the garden. Davos turns and sees Sir Axel Florent. I just want to differentiate, this is not the Hand of the King. That is Alistair Florent, who we will see in Davos' next chapter as well. But this is Axel. I would say the much more not honorable one of the two. Queen Salisa's uncle and longtime Castellan of Dragonstone approaching with a dozen armed guards. The guards wear the fiery heart of R'hllor on their jerkins, marking them as Queen's men and followers of the Lord of Light. Another bad omen for Davos. Queen's men are coming to get him. It's not Stannis here. It's not Selyse. It's not like a warm, happy party. It seems like something much worse. Davos then remembers that Axel had always treated him respectfully in the past because of his standing with Stannis. But this time, however, Axel's attitude is cold and hostile. Rather than greeting Davos warmly, he immediately questions how Davos could have survived the Blackwater. Davos answers with a bit of dry humor, remarking that onions float. He then asks whether Axel has come to bring him before Stannis. Axel reveals that he has come for a very different purpose, to arrest Davos and throw him into the dungeon. He orders his guards to seize Davos and confiscate his dagger. Axel accuses Davos of intending to use the knife to murder Melisandre. And this is very interesting because right away, this is a huge twist. Because what's going to happen to Davos? Is he going to be executed? What's going to happen? But it also makes you wonder, how did Melisandre know? The only person that Davos told this plan to was Salladhor Saan. And obviously, Salladhor Saan is not going to betray Davos. Of all the things you can think about him, that is not one. So there has to be something magical happening. And it goes to build the allure of Melisandre. And we won't really ever know how Melisandre's powers work. We get a little bit of a hindsight into how she works as a person in dance. But again, it's an amazing plot twist. It's so awesome because you're thinking there's like two options here for Davos. He's going to go in, he's going to try to assassinate her, he's going to either fail, so he's not actually going to be able to kill her, or he's going to kill her. And George just gives you a third option that you never expect, but makes perfect sense. Great end to a chapter. I think this is, again, I think all of Davos's chapters are really, really strong. We're only 5 chapters in right now in the reread for his chapters, but they're all fantastic. And this is another really, really strong one that so many parallels to Cressen's chapter in A Clash of Kings that I tried to accurately show throughout the video. But thank you guys all for watching. I really enjoyed this chapter specifically, doing the reread, and I hope you guys did as well. I will see you guys all back in the next video, so I will see you then. Bye, guys.